Our guest speaker tonight, as you all know, is Noel Pearson, and he's taken John Button's quarterly essay as a starting point for his own exploration of the Labor Party and its future. Noel is one of Australia's most influential Aboriginal Australians. He's one of our most influential Australians, full stop, a lawyer, a land rights activist, and founder of the Cape York Institute for Policy and Leadership, an organisation promoting the economic and social development of Cape York Indigenous peoples. It's a real pleasure, it's an honour to have him here tonight, so would you please welcome him, Mr. Noel Pearson.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your kind introduction, and thank you to the Button family and to the administrators of this oration for this huge privilege. I met John Button on a few occasions after his retirement from politics. He and Mick Young were two people that I was absolutely privileged to briefly get to know. Mick Young was an absolute delight to get to know over several years that we sat on the Keating government's Multicultural Advisory Council. And I know John and Mick were a species of Labor politician that are extremely rare to find nowadays. Let me pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land and to the Indigenous community of Melbourne, and pay my respects to everyone who has enjoyed this festival this week. John Button's 2002 quarterly essay, Beyond Belief, laid out a devastating analysis of the state of the Australian Labor Party in the new century. It was required reading then, and there being little evidence that it was ever heeded in the 8 years since, is required reading today. Anyone seeking to work out how it has come to this in August 2010 is well advised to return to this essay. Let me say from the outset, I am a Labor outsider. My father and his father before him drove cattle in Cape York Peninsula in the days before our citizenship. The picture of black stock workers sitting out on the dark wood heap, looking through the kerosene lamp-lit windows of the boss's station house, dining on damper and black tea while the white fellas sit eating their corned beef, potatoes and white sauce, is an enduring metaphor of black, rural and remote Australia. I confessed that whilst I have never stood with my nose pressed to the glass of the big house of federal Labor, I have looked from the fireplace out back with some perhaps untoward and certainly unrequited feelings of desire. But for native Australians, that door has never opened from the outside. I was obviously reflecting on my own embarrassed condition when in my 2007 essay for the Griffith Review, I referenced Robert Penn Warren's machine politics saga based on Louisiana Governor Huey Long, All the King's Men. Penn Warren's nailing of the essential condition of that hayseed Willie Stark drove a 6-inch bullet head unnervingly close to my own dyslexic heart. Quote, back in those days, the boss had been blundering and groping his unwitting way toward the discovery of himself, of his great gift. Wearing his overalls that bagged down about the seat, or the blue serge suit with the tight, shiny pants, nursing some blind and undefined compulsion within him like fate or a disease. Nursing some blind and undefined compulsion within him like fate or a disease. My late father was wont to tell me, the purpose of life is to serve God and to serve your fellow man. This injunction too often weighs like a resentful burden on one's life. For my father never did tell me that which I will not fail to tell my own son. You have to look after yourself too. Otherwise, whatever your gift, disease will surely be your fate. Having come close to reducing leadership to curse, the corollary of night dreams of a better world is the hot sunlight of daily reality. Leadership requires dreaming at night and walking by day, and trying to avoid dreaming by day and sleepwalking at night. I won't rehearse John Button's diagnosis of the Labor Party after the 2001 election, defeat, but the main themes are the same as those that emerged in the lead-up, conduct and aftermath of this year's election. A party bereft of purpose and peopled by a decreasingly diverse talent pool of apparatchiks. Whilst this derogatory appellation is commonplace, the American historian James Billington's definition makes it particularly apposite in the present context. A man not of grand plans, but of 100 carefully executed details. Less than 3 years on the Treasury benches, and it has all come to this. Whether or not Julia Gillard succeeds in salvaging a government from this wreckage, John Button's 8 years old council hovers like Banquo's ghost over the bloody scene. The failure of the Federal Labor Party to define and to articulate, other than in the most banal terms, its reason for existence in national politics is not good for the cause of those who seek progress in Australia. Labor's most compelling claim as to its most essential difference from its Conservative coalition opponents was that it was what the late Kim Beazley Sr. called the party of social attack. Whereas both Labor and the Liberal Conservatives might make claims to more or less competent management of the nation's government, and both might make claims to their commitment to economic reform, it is only Labor that harbours the idea that it is about social change. Whilst the Liberal Conservatives also wish for a good society, by definition, they eschew government agendas for social progress. They have a long philosophical heritage that sees social progress as a steady evolution, and large governmental attempts to contrive progress will only result in waste and unintended consequences. The Liberal and Conservative tradition has a well-pedigreed scepticism and indeed strong objection to what their opponents once regularly called social justice. Today, Labor is more sparing in its deployment of these two words, social justice. Whilst social justice is still part of Labor's intramural pieties, a useful rallying cry for the true believers, in front of the nation at large, the concept is muted and liturgical. If Labor was to say what it was about, why could it not simply say that it was about economic prosperity and social justice? The truth is that it could not. And the problem is not with the notion of economic prosperity. Plainly, Labor stands for it, and everyone is clear on its meaning. It is the social justice part of this formula that Labor could not sustain. It could not because the notion of social justice is completely elusive and has for too long remained undefined by those who say they were and are all for it. Both the end state of justice and the means by which that end state is supposed to be achieved is utterly undefined. And all attempts to cobble together a definition of what contemporary Labor politicians mean when they deploy the words social justice would just confirm to their Liberal Conservative opponents that Labor has in mind yet another great socialist project that will end in waste and tears. How is it that a concept that has travelled with the social democratic project through such a long and storied history has ended up so equivocal? Why does every attempt at articulation sound like someone either sincerely wanting or insincerely promising utopia? Kevin Rudd's great nemesis, the liberal economist Friedrich Hayek, once wrote, quote, "I have come to feel strongly that the greatest service I can tender to my fellow men would be that I could make the speakers and writers among them thoroughly ashamed ever again to employ the term social justice." It may be that the high priest of what Rudd called neoliberalism has finally succeeded in intimidating the Social Democrats out of their convictions about social justice. My intention tonight is to suggest that social justice could be a real concept and could be the concern of a party such as Labor that seeks to actively work to make a better society, if it be properly understood. This proper understanding would, however, require an abandonment of the great part of the accumulated theology of social democratic thinking around social justice, and would more heed the rational objections of the Liberals than the moral enthusiasms of the Social Democrats. We will come to the meaning of social justice in due course. Let me at this point dilate on two of my own native thoughts about leadership. My first point concerns the difference between natural and structural leadership. Structural leadership depends upon formal, political, cultural, economic, or religious structures for mandate, authority, power, and influence. Natural leadership depends on no institutional power or recognition. It is simply the power of human self-determination and the informal recognition of its inspiration and influence over other humans. There are many more natural leaders than structural leaders in the world, and they will be readily found in families, community groups, and in the full range of informal social, cultural, and religious settings. Some structural leaders are also natural leaders, but most natural leaders do not occupy formal structures. The problem with the parliamentary parties is that they provide pathways to power for structural leaders who may have never exercised natural leadership and may never possess it. They are masters of the structures of power, but in the absence of those structures, they could not lead men and women. Whilst it is not a problem exclusive to it, It is this preponderance of structural leadership that is a large part of Labor's problem of parliamentary representation. My second point concerns the dialectical way in which I conceive leadership and policy. It is important to my argument tonight to explain my dialectical view and what I mean by the radical centre. Let me extract the explanation I laid out in my 2007 essay for the Griffith Review. I wrote, "We are prisoners of our metaphors. By thinking of realism and idealism as opposite ends of a two-dimensional plane, we see leaders inclining to one side or the other. The naive and indignant yaw towards ideals and yet get nowhere, but their souls remain pure. The cold-eyed and impatient pride themselves on their lack of romance and emotional foolishness, pragmatism and a remorseless Kissinger-esque grasp of power make winning and survival the prize every time. Those who harbour ideals, but who need to work within the parameters of real power, as opposed to simply cloaking lazy capitulation under the easy mantle of righteous impotence, end up splitting the difference somewhere between ideals and reality. This is called compromise. But I prefer a pyramid metaphor of leadership, with one side being realism and the other idealism, and the quality of leadership dependent on how closely the two sides are brought together. The apex of leadership is the point where the two sides meet. The highest ideals on earth are realized when leaders strive to secure them through close attention to reality. Lofty idealism without pragmatism is worthless. What is pragmatism without ideals? At best, it is management, but not leadership. It takes insight, skill and creativity, careful calculation as well as bold judgment, prudence as well as risk, perseverance as well as a preparedness to alter course, belief as well as humility, and great competence as well as the ability to make good from mistakes, to bring ideals close to reality. One must be hard-headed in order to never let go of ideals. Idealism and realism in leadership do not constitute a zero-sum game. This is not about securing a false compromise. The best leadership occurs at the point of highest tension between ideals and reality. This is the radical centre. If the idealism is weaker than the realism, then optimum leadership cannot be achieved, and vice versa. The radical centre is achieved when both are strong. In my essay, I suggested that there were at least 10 classic dialectical tensions in human policy: idealism versus realism, rights versus responsibilities, social order versus liberty, individual versus community, efficiency versus equality, structures versus behaviour, and personal agency, opportunity versus choice, unity and diversity, nature and man, and peace and war. But the truth is that dialectics are everywhere. Hegel and Marx were right about the dynamic unfolding of history through the tensions between thesis and antithesis and their resolution in synthesis, and the confusions who gave us yin and yang and their cultural counterparts the world over were right about the unity of opposites. My list of so-called classic dialectical tensions laid out only 10 of the most prominent tensions that lie at the heart of our greatest and ever-recurring public policy debates. Across all of these issues, there are tribes that vehemently hold the policy thesis, and there are tribes that hold the policy antithesis, and both sides prosecute their side with a vehemence and conviction about the correctness of their own side and the folly of the other. There is much tug of war in the world, and tragically, too little productive synthesis. The productive synthesis is the radical centre. The radical centre is both an intellectual place and a real place in the dynamic political economy. The radical centre therefore requires intellectual insight and practical political and economic action. Intellectual insight alone is no guarantee that the real circumstances will change accordingly. We can often see what we need to do, but we may not succeed in doing so. One example of the intellectual identification of the radical centre concerns the dialectic of war and peace set out by President Barack Obama in his acceptance speech upon receiving the Nobel Prize for Peace last year. Only by the preparedness to fight war is peace maintained. Many here tonight will not agree, but I think Obama identifies what I would say is the radical centre of this fundamental tension. Whether his leadership can get his country to follow his intellectual identification of the radical centre is, of course, another question. When we started our reform work in Cape York Peninsula, our starting point was to work out how people advance in the world. If the world be a pyramid where good things flow upwards and the most miserable people occupy the very bottom, then how do peoples rise up to take a fairer place? The metaphor that resulted from our consideration of the rules of advancement in a world dominated by capitalism was the staircase. Rather than a ladder of opportunity, ours was a staircase comprising 3 parts. Firstly, the foundations upon which the stairs are built. For us, these foundations constituted the social and cultural norms of a community, a group, people, family, or society. Norms that mandate personal and societal responsibilities to one's family and to one's community. Wherever peoples possess strong norms, they are well prepared for advancement. Secondly, the structures underpinning the stairs. For us, these underpinning support structures constituted the investment in capabilities provided by the society to their people. What the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen called capabilities included investments in health, education, infrastructure, and other economic and political opportunities and freedoms. Thirdly, the actual stairs and their rational alignment heading upwards. These were the rungs that individuals would need to climb to advancement. Eureka! We understood immediately a simple point that had hitherto been obscured in the prevalent policy thinking about the predicament of the wretched of the earth. Each and every rung on the stairs of progress must be climbed by real individual human beings. The stairs are narrow and only allow individuals clutching their children to their breasts to ascend two by two. The reasons they climbed was that they made choices and they could see incentives further up the stairs. There was no mass elevator for entire communities or groups to ascend all at once. They are just the stairs, and no man is exempted from the need to climb in the same manner as one of Clarence's murderers in Richard III answered the means by which he had come hither, on my legs. Individuals climb with their own legs on behalf of themselves and their families, in pursuit of their own interests. Our metaphor enabled us to see where social and communal provisioning was relevant and where it was not, and where individual self-interest was. The foundations of social and cultural norms strongly correspond with conservatism. We came to appreciate that peoples were well served if their cultures mandated mutual responsibilities and respect, if cultures obliged their members to fulfill their responsibilities for the care of their children and the formative development of their youth, they stood them in good stead for advancement. Our policy thinking around these foundations found a strong resonance in conservative thought. The support structures of capabilities underpinning the stairs strongly corresponded with redistributive thinking. It was about social investment in people's capabilities, health, education, and so on. Social investment was critical. Our policy thinking around these support structures found strong resonance in social democratic thought. The stairs themselves and their rational alignment and the fact that they were ascended by real individual human beings climbing in pursuit of their own interests strongly corresponded with liberal thinking. We understood the power of choice, rational incentives, and that the ultimate engine of development and progress is the self-interest of individuals on behalf of their families. We came to Adam Smith via our staircase. The most powerful engine at the centre of development is the self-interest of individuals seeking a better life for themselves. I come from outside of the three great philosophical traditions of Western social and political thought: liberalism, socialism, and conservatism.